All right, now we're going to cut the miters on each one of these. So remember, the one with the 3 cuts is the inside. So if I have my box here, these two sides be facing each other, the miter has to come out. So the simple way is, I'm right-handed, so I always turn the miter saw to my right because it's more comfortable to use this way. I always have the outside of the box facing towards me. Now whether it's this way or this way doesn't matter, you're actually going to cut both ways. But for now, I'm just going to trim off the end, flip, trim off the end and make it nice, slow, and sharp. Take your time, do not ram through because the board tends to move away from a blade going too fast. Hold it tight and make your cut nice and straight. So bring it down, and I don't want to cut off a ton of extra wood. So I'm just going to make it so it's sharp. Good. Now I flip it over. Do it again. Still no measurements, but I'm just sharpening the ends up with my miter. Now obviously this is my shorter board, so this is my 2 5s. So the easiest way to get it so the cuts are the same, and I need these boards exactly 5 inches, is take a tape measure and a pencil. And what I'm going to do is mark my 5 inches this way, and then I'm going to put a board here, a stop block here, so that when I flip this over to do the other side, I can make the exact same cut. The reason that I like this way is even if my 5 inches is just a little bit off, for whatever reason I cut wrong, with a stop block there, they're both going to be wrong by the same amount, so I'll still get a square block. So now I can see my line here. And I know that my miter has to go opposite that one. So I always draw, it's got to go that way. That's the correct way. Now the shadow line allows me to see right where I'm going to cut. Now I'm not going to cut yet. I'll have it right where it's going to be. I just found a piece of junk in the back. And I put this right up against it, right there. And then clamp it in. Just tighten that up so it doesn't move. Doesn't need to be super tight, but as long as I don't slam into it, it should be fine. Now I've got a board that's set in the right position, and when I flip the other one, it'll be perfect. So in this case, you see I'm letting it come to a stop before I lift. Because I can't shift this board out of the way, I don't want the blade to clip the end and give me a bit of a kickback. Now I flip that over. My miters are opposite, so I know that's correct. I just hold tight here. Again, I can do that, and that's okay, but take your time and be careful. We're going to do the exact same process with my longer piece and get those exactly the same, and then we can assemble. Now that all of your pieces are cut, you might notice that the chop saw tends to leave some little extra bits of wood here. I'll try to get those out a little bit with a pencil or something like that. Now we got to figure out how big are my top and my bottom here and here. So according to what I've cut, this will be the top, that'll be the bottom. Just make sure you know the difference as you're putting them in. Now what you make these out of really doesn't matter. You could use the white melamine, or I could use a veneer plywood that's walnut in this case, or anything else. That's totally up to you, but all of my 1/4 inch stuff should fit in this groove. Now here's how you measure it. This distance, I need the bottom to go from here to here, not outside to outside and not inside here. It's half that distance. So I need to go from there to there. I can't measure from the end. There's nothing to hook on, so I'm going to do something called burning an inch, which means I'm just going to move my tape measure in to an inch right where I need it to end. And it says 8.5, but since I burned an inch, it needs to be 7.5. 7.5 by whatever this will be, and I'll measure that. Then I'll go into the lumber room, find what I want, and make those cuts and check it. We'll dry fit it and we'll go that direction. Now that we've got these cut, let's see if they'll fit. Just slip everything together. And what I'm going to look for are gaps. Just want to see if everything fits tight or not. So if I squeeze that shut, do I see any gaps where the miters are? And it doesn't look that way. When I squeeze them tight, everything looks pretty good and tight. Good. If you see any gaps along the miters, no matter how hard you squeeze, they don't go away. All that means is you have to trim this a little smaller, whether it's this way or this way. That's up to you. But trim it until it fits. Everything looks good, however. Now is the time to sand everything down. Once it's together and we glue it together, it's impossible to sand the inside. So I'm going to take a moment, sand down each piece on the inside, then we can get it all glued up. Now let's glue it up. For the last few minutes, I sanded the inside. As you saw, I sanded both sides of this because no matter what, these are going to be tricky to sand later. But I lined them up on the outside and line these up nice and tight. And you can see that I've been putting tape on them. So instead of clamping all this together, we're going to tape. I'm going to flip the whole thing over, put the top and the bottom in, and kind of wrap around. Glue each joint, wrap around, and then tape the end. So there's no clamps in this project. So I put these together edge to edge so I don't see a gap here. Just make sure they're lined up so, you know, if they're staggered like that, obviously that isn't going to work. So make sure they're as lined up as you can get and as close as you can get also. Pull off about the right amount of green tape. You could use packing tape. But this works, I found this works really well. Stick it down really well, and then I like to reinforce it a little bit more on the top and bottom so it doesn't pop apart. This usually does a good job. But this way, the tighter I can make these two together, when I bend it all together, that keeps that joint really tight. So now that that's all done, and by the way, remember that it's short, long, because it's pretty funny when you put these in the wrong order and can't figure out why it doesn't fit. We do not need to glue in the bottom and top where these go. You don't need to put any glue in there. I only am gluing the joints. And it does not take a lot, because once these joints seal up, there's quite a bit of glue squeeze out. So I'm just going to put a little bit there and there. I put a line right in the bottom and then just a little bit on the sides where I want to make sure there's a good glue joint. Because as I squeeze it shut, it's going to squeeze all this glue down here out. All right, now I can put these inside. Make sure you have the best face out. So this has a little ding here that I want on the inside so I don't see it. And then go ahead and close it all up. You can see the glue squeeze out, and I didn't put a whole lot of glue in there. But that's what I want. I mean, glue squeeze out means that it's going to be a nice tight joint. Okay, so far so good. And then we glue here. This one, of course, doesn't have the tape on it like the others, but it will still do the job once I shut that tight. All right, so once that's closed, again, we do exactly the same thing. I pull this into place to make sure those joints are perfect, and I pull and stretch the tape. Masking tape is perfect for woodworking because it stretches almost like a clamp. All right, I need to pull that out. There we go, right there, pull it nice and tight. Now I'm going to put one more of those right in the center. Gives me a nice tight joint. If I take a look, I do have some squeeze out, and now's the time to take care of it. You can get wet glue out of there with a wet paper towel. Get it out of there now, it'll just save you time later. But all of my joints are tight, and they all match correctly. So now we let it dry, clean up all these and let it dry for at least a half an hour before we start milling off the top, taking the tape off.